a solved cold case out of Yavapai County. The sheriff's office explaining how they were able to track down a murder suspect and get him to confess. ABC 15 obtaining exclusive audio from his interview with detectives. I'm Ashley Paredes alongside Tom Bolts with the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office. Thank you for being here. The case we're looking into today started as a missing persons, then turned to murder. 64-year-old Kristal Forrest, dating back to March 2009.
We actually had a couple of calls over a couple of months, and because she was a 64-year-old lady, she had a history of traveling around the world. We had gone out and done some stuff looking for her. And then in July of 2009, called back, and then we realized that we needed to go a little further with this. So we sent Detective Doug Brown out to the house where she was last seen, and Doug talked to her former employer and then learned information that took us further and further.
Yeah, come to find out, she was helping that employer. He was blind and was assisting him with stuff he needed around the house. And she was living on his property in a mobile home.
Correct, yes.
And while she was out one day, she ran across a man who was going by the name of Charles Olson.
He was, first, we were told his name was Chris. The legal name that he was using at the time was Charles Olson. She had met him at a DCS office in Cottonwood when they were there, both of them trying to get benefits. And she felt sorry for him, took him back to the residence where she was living, helping out her employer. And the employer didn't like him and told her that he couldn't stay, so she decided to move.
She had asked who she thought was Charles to help her move down to Austin to drop off her stuff, and then she was going to be house sitting in Mexico. So how many days do you think they were actually traveling together? Because they passed through El Paso, which later is where her body was found.
So by the time they loaded the trailer up, it was in the evening. We believe they stayed at a hotel in Coldest Junction that night and then probably reached El Paso the following day. The U-Haul was returned, I believe, 3 days or 4 days after she rented it, was returned to a U-Haul dealer in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And we had the video of that, but the vehicle that returned the U-Haul trailer was I believe it was a white Ford pickup truck. We never were able to identify that truck or who owned it or who was driving it.
But the person who rented the U-Haul was, in fact, Kristal.
Yes, Kristal rented the U-Haul here in Arizona, but the trailer, it was returned in the middle of the night, I want to say about 2 in the morning. And again, we have that on video from the
What location was that?
That was at a U-Haul. There's, I believe there's 4 or 5 U-Haul lots in Las Cruces. This was the closest one to the interstate.
I know that they met by chance and didn't know each other very long, but come to find out, Charles was actually using a fake name, actually a stolen identity from a roommate that he used to live with, and his real name, Robert Reed.
Correct.
How did you guys find all that out?
So Detective Brown, when he went out to the place where she had lived last, talked to her former employer, he said, hey, his van is sitting over there. I think it's broken down. Detective Brown went over and found some documents in the van that had the name Robert Reed. And so he ran that information and found the warrant that Mr. Reed had been sentenced in absentia to 18 years in Arizona DOC for an arson case down here in the valley several years prior.
So he was out on bond?
He'd been convicted, was out on bond pending sentencing, and while he was in between his conviction and sentencing, he took off and went on the lam.
And all these years, he was using his roommate's identity during
Correct.
That time.
When he came back to Arizona, this was a roommate he had in Florida, and when he came back to Arizona, he was using that name, Charles Olson.
Now, when you guys started questioning him about Kristal. I know he started telling a story about she had sold her car, her Nissan Pathfinder, to him. That ended up not being so true, but what was that story that he told?
He told us that he had met her at a Walmart parking lot there in Cottonwood, and she agreed to sell him the Pathfinder for $1,000, which car was worth quite a bit more than that. So yeah. we thought that was suspicious, and a lot of the other things that he told us just didn't make sense and were suspicious.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know if you're telling me things because I understand why you don't want to be found out, but my personal concern is about Kristal Forrest.
I don't know anything about Kristal. Other than, like I said, I bought her, dropped from her, and worked for her for one day, and that's it.
There's nothing else?
Nothing else.
At that time, you couldn't charge him with anything in relation to Kristal, but you did get him and arrest him on the warrant he had for the arson case.
Correct. Once we found the warrant, we executed that warrant and took him to jail, and then he was quickly taken back to DOC, or taken down to DOC, to serve out that 18-year sentence while we continued to investigate Kristal's disappearance.
I know during that time you interviewed him, and at one point he said he had lost his memory.
So as you sit in jail for your charges, I will find out the truth, but you do not wish to share it with me.
Well, it's fine, but one thing that I will say, other than would like to speak with a lawyer and so forth, is that I didn't do the crime that they're convicting me of either.
Yes, we had a cold case volunteer who's a retired Long Beach detective, Paul Chastain, and Paul went down to the prison to interview Robert Reed several times. And the second or third time that he came back, he said that Reed had told him he had amnesia due to getting hit in the head, and that he couldn't remember anything, didn't even know who he was. So we made a plan to go back down there again, but this time to take some things that would jog his memory and get him to make some kind of spontaneous statement about, that would kind of show him and us that everybody knew he didn't have amnesia.
Yeah. And it was around 2015 when you said you were going to indict him with identity theft, fraud, forgery. You said about 15 to 20 different counts.
Correct.
So you were using that as leverage to maybe make a plea deal. That way you can maybe find out more about Kristal and what happened and where she was located.
Yeah, he was, based on his conviction and sentence for the arson case, he would have been released from prison somewhere in his late 60s, early 70s. And so it was reasonable to think that he could probably get released and still be alive. And we realized we weren't getting enough information to charge him with killing Kristal, but we knew that he had done something to her. So we looked at, and this is where, Paul Chastain came into this again. He decided that he would look at all of these, what we call lesser included crimes at times. So the forgery, the fraud, the identity theft, all of those things. And so those added up to probably another 15 to 25 years that he would have done in prison, which would have meant he would never walk out.
Honestly, try to think about that from my viewpoint. If you were 55 years old and somebody was telling you that you were going to spend the next 20 years in prison, wouldn't it kind of upset you a little bit?
So we use that as leverage to tell them, look, if you tell us where Kristal is and what happened to her, the family has told the prosecutors that they would be willing to let you have a lighter sentence.
Yeah, and he actually did go through with that, even though he was saying he lost his memory and that he had nothing to do with her death. He did end up telling where the body was. So in essence, showing that he was involved in her murder. Let's pull up the map right now, because I know that you use Google Maps for him to kind of pinpoint exactly where the body was found. You didn't have him go out there. You were on the phone with Texas Rangers, kind of indicating, it's in this vicinity. They were on their way to go to Austin because he was helping her move in the U-Haul. So at that point, they're in El Paso. So at this point, kind of look at the map and tell me the area where her body was found.
So they're a little bit east of El Paso. And when you look at this image on Google Earth, it's in the middle of nowhere. Not even a whole lot of vegetation, some brush, but nothing, most of it's dirt, and some shrubs, I guess. It's a little bit east of Interstate 10. At that point, Interstate 10's running pretty much north-south. And he said after he realized she was deceased, he drove her out there and got off the road a little bit and laid her body down behind some trees or shrubs.
Yeah, I know at some point he kind of led to what the motive or reasoning was to her death.
He told us he had to allocute to take the plea. And so when he made the statement in court about why he killed her or how she was murdered, he said they had been driving together for a few days and they weren't getting along, and they got out to talk on this off-ramp off of Interstate 10, got in an argument. He pushed her, she fell backwards, hit her head, and that he realized she was deceased, so then he tried to get rid of the body. We don't believe that that's exactly what happened, but we were able to get her located and get her back to her family.
Wow, that's pretty impressive, especially not having him there, and for him to recall all of that after all these years passed and still remember exactly where she was at. In that area, like we were talking about, it's a desolate area with a lot of brush, so no housing development out there. Nobody could easily go by and see her body at any point. So unless he told you where her body was at, you probably wouldn't have been able to find her right away.
No. Over the years, we had sent out posters looking for her. We did searches all over Arizona. Some other volunteers on the cold case unit helped us out with that. Cochise County did some searches for us. We had posters out. We sent posters to hunters that were in the area for either deer hunts or javelina hunts or bird hunts, hoping that somebody would stumble across her. And of course, we were about 1,000 miles off because she was
right
2 states away.
What was your specific involvement in the case?
So when this started, I was the sergeant in charge of the unit, and I actually took the call in July and sent Detective Brown out to start the investigation. It was actually his last day as a detective. He was going back to patrol, but he's one of the best detectives I've ever worked with. He went out and put this together, and then at one point we brought him back into CI for a while, and he was able to keep it going. I went down and interviewed Robert Reed a couple of times. The last time I interviewed him was when we told him, we were asking him for her location and asking him to confess. He was refusing. We told him, we're going to indict you on all these other things. You're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. But the family, if you'll plead guilty and tell us where she is, the family's willing to give you a lighter sentence, which give you a chance to get out. And then just supervising, having meetings with the detectives and the volunteers who are working on it.
I know Kristal had 2 dogs, and from what we know, she had traveled to India, possibly got one or both of them there, and brought them back, and was very attached to them. She would call them her children.
Yep. Yeah, she and that was kind of who she was. She would travel a lot, and she would take in strays, like these 2 dogs, like Robert Reed, and she did. She cared for those dogs as though they were her own kids.
And in trying to find her, you also use that to help by putting out pictures of her dog and going to different animal control services, trying to find the dogs to see if that could lead you to her or lead you to some answers to finding out what happened.
Yes. Yeah, we sent the pictures of the dogs. We put them on flyers. We sent them to different animal shelters along Interstate 10 between Prescott and Austin. and we were hoping that somebody would have seen those and give us an idea of where they came in. We never did find the dogs.
Just recently, about a year or two ago, he died in prison.
Right. I can't remember the exact date, but yeah, it was not that long ago that we were told that he had passed away while he was in there.
But in this case, you got to see from start to finish the full circle of, having a missing person turned murder case to then finding that suspect. For you to be part of all of that, how does that make you feel?
Oh, that's why I do this. That's what you're hoping to do every case.
Exactly.
There's no better feeling in the world.
What could we learn from this case?
So in this case, we learned that while you have your eye on the big case, on the homicide, there's a lot of other little things that suspect did to either commit that or to cover it up. And so by taking that step back, and this was again, volunteer Paul Chastain that came up with this idea, to take that step back and charge for all those lesser crimes. And that's what gave us the leverage that eventually led him to tell us where she was. Had we not done that, he passed away a year or two ago, we wouldn't know, her family wouldn't know, but this way we got her remains back to her family and we know what happened.
Yeah, this was the best outcome to a very tragic situation. Thank you, Captain Bolts, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Arizona's Coldest Cases, an ABC15 true crime series where we team up with local law enforcement, bringing awareness to the victims and their families still awaiting justice. Each episode breaks down a single case, giving you a timeline of the investigation from where things started to where things stand now. You can watch episodes on ABC15.com, the ABC15 mobile app, Roku, YouTube, or any of your other favorite streaming devices.